So, welcome to the continuing Bhagavad Gita as it is. We're in chapter 2. We're at text number 23. So, we're going to pick up from text number 23. We may refer to text number 22, and we may go a little further on, actually. We'll see how it goes. Now, I'll make the comment now. If anyone has any reflections that they make, the chat box is there. I'll mention this again a little later when other people come in. But you can put any comments into the chat box there. So that's either a reflection, anything that we discussed that maybe piques your interest or sticks in your mind and you think, oh that's interesting, that's something to take forward. So you could reflect that back and we'll broaden the conversation a little bit that way. So that's a possibility. So let's just pop it in the chat box and we'll have a look there and see whatever comes up. So we're going to begin with Bhagavad Gita 2:23, and we'll begin by offering our obeisances to His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Ramane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvisesha Sunyavari Paschatsadesha Tarane. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Text number 23, Bhagavad Gita. Contents of the Gita summarized, chapter 2. Nainam chidanti shastrani, nainam dathati pavakaha, na chainam kledayantyapo, na soshayati marutaha. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation: the soul can never be cut into pieces by any weapon, nor can he be burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. Srila Prabhupada's purport. All kinds of weapons, swords, flames, rains, tornadoes, etc., are unable to kill the spirit soul. It appears that there were many weapons, or many kinds of weapons, made of earth, water, air, ether, etc., in addition to the modern weapons of fire. Even the nuclear weapons of the modern age are classified as fire weapons, but formerly there were other weapons made of all different types of material elements. Firearms were counteracted by water weapons, which are unknown to modern science. Nor do modern scientists have knowledge of tornado weapons. Nonetheless, the soul can never be cut into pieces nor annihilated by any number of weapons, regardless of scientific devices. Nor was it ever possible to cut the individual souls from the original soul. The Mayavadi, however, cannot describe how the individual soul evolved from ignorance and consequently became covered by illusory energy. Because they are atomic individual souls, sanatana, eternally, so because they are atomic individual souls eternally, sanatana, they are prone to be covered by the illusory energy because they're very small, and thus they become separated from the association of the Supreme Lord, just as sparks of the fire, although one in quality with the fire, are prone to be extinguished when out of the fire. In the Varaha Purana, the living entities are described as separated parts and parcels of the Supreme. They are eternally so according to the Bhagavad Gita also. Amayvamsa jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana manasa stani indriyani prakriti stani karshaji. Amayvamsa jiva loka sanatana. Prabhupada does quote that. He says, Natu evaham natu nesam natvam name janati pa nachaiva nabhavishabe sarve vayamata param. Never was there a time that I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings that are assembled here on this battlefield, nor in the future will any of us cease to be. We are unborn, eternal, ever existing, and non-dying. We're not slain when the body is slain. So Krishna explains that this right from the start. We've always existed. In the past, we're existing now as individuals speaking to one another here in this battlefield. We will continue to exist. We may exist in different shapes and forms and sizes if we're the small living entity. But Krishna is making that claim in a statement that it's an eternal position for the living entity, and later on he confirms that when he says Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, that the living entities are Sanatana, they're my eternal fragmental parts, and they find themselves in this material world struggling very hard with the six senses, which includes the mind. So Srila Prabhupada goes to great lengths to establish this fact, because unfortunately through speculative processes we think in other ways. Avyaktam vyaktam apanam manyante mam ubudhaya parambhavam ajananto mamavyayam anutamam. Krishna in the Gita also, he explains this later on. He says that unintelligent persons who do not know me perfectly think that I, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, was impersonal before and have now assumed this personality. Due to their poor fund of knowledge, they do not realize my higher nature, which is imperishable and supreme. So Krishna is trying to point out the different categories of energy and the situation of those different types of energy. Krishna is known as Vibhu or great, and the Jivatma is Anu, very, very small. In fact, we can hardly stretch our capacity of our thinking to accommodate the smallness of the soul and the greatness, the infinitesimal Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is maintaining all the other living entities. It's inconceivable for us. And the smallness of the soul, we search for the soul, we look for the soul, we try to understand what is the soul. And it's being described here by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, and the Gita is known as the Gita Upanishad. So it is giving direction. In the Mahabharata, it's full of stories, and in the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita. So the Upanishad means to point towards. So it's pointing towards the spiritual understanding. So within the Mahabharata, this is the essence of the Mahabharata, is the Bhagavad Gita. And it is giving us this transcendental knowledge, which is not knowledge of this world, but knowledge of the superior nature, which is very beneficial for the living entity to help him come out of his conditioned existence. So this is very important to understand the eternal nature of the soul. The Mayavadis are struggling to be able to, Prabhupada says, cannot describe how the individual soul evolved from ignorance and consequently became covered. They can't quite explain that. So I'll pick it up again where Prabhupada is saying, because they are atomic individual souls, sanatana, eternally, they are prone to be covered by the illusory energy, and thus they become separated from the association of the Supreme Lord, just as the sparks of the fire, although one in quality with the fire, are prone to be extinguished when out of the fire. In the Varaha Purana, the living entities are described as separated parts and parcels of the Supreme. They are eternally so, according to the Bhagavad Gita also. So even after being liberated from illusion, the living entity remains a separate identity, as is evident from the teachings of the Lord to Arjuna. Arjuna became liberated by the knowledge received from Krishna, but he never became one with Krishna. Om Ganatimirandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chakshuran Militam Yena Tasmai Sri Grave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, and my spiritual master is forcing me to open my eyes with the torchlight of transcendental knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto his lotus feet. So, to become liberated is very important. Everyone is looking for liberation. Some are overtly looking, they're desiring liberation, but that is a very rare soul. But basically, everyone is looking for freedom or cessation of their suffering condition in material existence, or in existence. And that everyone can experience. That's what drives the suffering condition of the world. It drives action. And if we analyze a little bit, we'll see that the action of the living entity is to overcome his difficulties and to be situated in a happy place, in a happy way. I think no one would disagree with that. We see the dog is running, trying to get to where it wants to go. The cats are, all the species of life are trying to adjust. We'll see the cows today in the pasture. You'll find that they will be sitting outside and they'll be trying to chew the cud a fair bit and just relax and enjoy the sunshine. So that is the way the living entity functions to find pleasure. Anandamaya Vyasat. The nature of the living entity is blissfulness. And in the material body and in the material world, we don't actually experience that blissful condition, although we try very hard to do that in varieties of ways and varieties of bodies. So again, we don't speak of some sectarian understanding of existence, but we talk about axiomatic facts. This is a fact. It can be observed from any angle of vision that that is the nature of the soul, or the nature, let's say, not the soul, we'll not say the soul at this point, we'll say every living being is to seek out happiness, to seek out liberation of freedom from suffering. So, the soul is placed in amongst this material energy. And due to being in that situation, he finds himself in so many, he finds himself in the beginning of the whole thing. It's called Ahankara. If we trace it all the way back, we'll find we have Bhumi, Rapo, Nalo, Vai of the earth, the water, the fire, the air, and the ether, and it's becoming more subtle as we go. So the earth is there. So it's a very gross manifestation. But within the earth is the water and the fire and the air and the ether. And so we go finer than earth, we go to the water, and we find that there's no fragrance from the water. It's just more subtle, there's not a fragrance there. And from the water we go to fire, we find that there's form, but there's no taste. There's no taste. And we go finer than fire, and we go to the air, and we find that there's no form in the air. We go finer than air, we go to ether, and there's only sound in ether. And then Krishna explains that these are my separated gross manifestations, and there's another subtle energy or a subtle aspect of that material that is called the mind. You can't see the mind, but we all have a mind. Absolutely clear that that's a fact, but it's not perceptible by the gross senses. Then Krishna introduces the intellect, that although we have a mind, which we understand from Krishna's revelation, the mind's business is very much attached to the senses and the sense objects, and its business is to accept and reject those things favorable for sense gratification, to satisfy the senses. Therefore, the mind is also often called the sixth sense. It's the pivoting point of all the sensual connections. So it's called the sixth sense. but higher than the mind is the intelligence. So, given the example, many times you might find yourself having eaten a huge feast, and somebody comes in with a preparation that they forgot. It's a bucket of gulab jamans, or it's whatever it may be, and your mind says, "Whoa, yes, I like those," but it doesn't have the intelligence to understand that actually you've completely eaten so much and you can't like that. So there's an intellect, intelligence is there. So the mind doesn't have that aspect. That is a higher thing. So we have the intelligence, and then the ahankara, the false conception of self, which is at the very beginning of the whole manifestation of the material entanglement, where we take on this false conception of bodily identity and think ourselves to be a product of the material energy, and I am whatever I may identify myself to be. So even if we study those things, though, Krishna says, above that, aparayam itvastyanyam prakriti vidime param jiva bhuta mahabaho mayatam mayate. We'll go on. I could search and try and find it, but let's leave it. Aparayam, I'll try once more. Aparayam itasanyam prakriti vidime param jiva bhuta mahabaho yayate jayate. Can't get the last two words. Jagat is the end. So he says there's another category of energy above the earth, water, fire, and ether, the mind, intelligence, and false ego. That is the living entity. And that living entity is struggling in this material world and sustaining the whole Jagat, the whole universe is being sustained by that living entity's desire to function separately from Krishna, from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that is to be understood. And we more or less have two paths. One is that this knowledge is known by the ancients. Let's say it that way. It's known by the ancients, by the histories of the Vedic literatures, and it can be understood, and it is covered. And Krishna says that's the nature again of this dark world, that I've imparted this knowledge prior to speaking to you, Arjuna, but again in the course of time this knowledge has been lost. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarsayo vidu sakalaha yoganashta parantapa. This knowledge is to be understood in this parampara system, but in the course of time the knowledge becomes covered. That's just the way of everything becomes covered, the buildings, everything. That is the material nature. So it has to be reestablished. So we have two possibilities. One is that no one knows the nature of the soul. No one knows God. No one knows anything virtually in modern science, although it's only been going for a couple of hundred years and pretty much very strongly due to the industrial and technological revolution, you could say. It's not even 100 years, but maybe the last 200 or 300 years, let's say like that. We're thinking that no one knows. Religion used to know, had some idea, but no, we found that that's not got all the answers. So science will discover something that is yet to be understood, and that's, we can put our faith in that concept or that idea. Or the other choice is that the knowledge is known by the ancients and it has been covered due to the passage of time and the influence of this this atheistic world that we live in is covering it more and more and more and more. So basically you only have those two choices. I'm sure some other speculator could introduce some other, as I've mentioned, there are a few that, yeah, but though even their speculations come under those two categories. Either the knowledge is there and it was known, it can be known, it's available, but it's covered and it needs uncovering, or the knowledge is not there fully and we will discover it through our modern attempts. So Krishna explains all this in the Bhagavad Gita, and Srila Prabhupada goes to great lengths to elaborate on these points that Krishna is making. That this knowledge is received in a certain way. Let's just see if I can find that, if we can. Evam parampara praptam imam rajasayo vidu. What is that too? Is it 434? This knowledge was thus received. Evam parampara. Where is that for? Where are we going? Oh, sorry. I've got too many markers in this book from other things. And we might not be able to. That's interesting. There's that verse here. Besides this inferior nature, Almighty Armed Arjuna, there is a superior energy of mind which all the living entities who are struggling with material nature and sustaining the universe. Wow. See if I can get it. There's so many verses. Now hear, O son of Prita, Arjuna, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. I shall now declare unto you in full this knowledge, both phenomenal and noumenal, by knowing which there shall remain nothing further to be known. Out of many thousands among men, one may endeavor for perfection, and those who have achieved perfection, hardly one knows me in truth. And he goes on to explain the earth and water and all the material energies. Then aparayami tvaschanyam yayedam dayate jagat is the end of that verse. There is a superior, above this inferior nature, there's a superior energy which are living entities, and they're struggling to and sustaining the universe by their struggles. So the system then to understand this is the Vedic system, that one should inquire into the absolute truth, and that the Supreme Personality of Godhead will reveal himself in Bhaktamama Vajanati Vanyas Chasmi Tatvata Tato Tatgatvata Pishate Tadanantaram. Third line's always the trickiest one. Only by undivided devotional service, Krishna is saying, can I be understood, and I reveal myself to my devotees when I am pleased with them with their transcendental loving service unto me. So this is, Srila Prabhupada was very, what would you say, he was very enthusiastic about the idea of revelation, because that is the ultimate process for understanding the Supreme. Krishna says, I don't manifest myself to the foolish and unintelligent. I am always covered by my eternal creative potency, Yogamaya, so the deluded world does not know me, who am unborn and infallible. I only reveal myself when I'm pleased with my devotees. So that's Krishna's prerogative. And you could think, well, that's very selfish, but it's not actually, because Krishna knows if he reveals himself, people will make offense. They don't know how to relate. Just like the queen or king of a country, there's a whole protocol into how to interact with such a noble or ignoble, whatever personality. There's a way. So we will only make offense. Just like, for an example, if we're here in Auckland, so that just up from the temple here, there's the Riverhead Tavern. So if somebody's saying, oh, I don't believe all this, why doesn't, if there's a God, then show me God. That's often said. So show me God. So if we ask Krishna to be there in the Riverhead Tavern, and he appeared playing his flute, threefold bending form, then those personalities would not know what to do. They would be saying, oh, do you want a drink? Or should we put, you want to stand on the table here or sit over here? There's no environment for Krishna, as I think I mentioned the other week. Krishna is, as soon as he begins to speak, it's transcendental. He can't speak otherwise, because there's no other nature for the Supreme. So everything about him is transcendental. So there would be more offenses in that way. They couldn't deal with the reality of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he reveals himself in different ways. Krishna says, everyone follows my path in all respects. Don't think that that's not the case. Some follow directly and take shelter of the divine nature, and others don't want to follow, and they act independently, just like in the state. There's those who follow the rules and are following the directions of the government, say, for example, and they're functioning in that way, and those who may be criminal and think, well, I don't care, I won't abide with any of the rules to do things, I'll just go and plunder and pillage here and there. No, you will have to follow. You will follow, but you'll be forced to follow. You'll be imprisoned. So that is the two aspects that Krishna says. He explains it to us. Everyone follows my path in all respects, some directly through taking shelter. Those great souls who are not deluded are under the protection of the divine nature. They're fully engaged in devotional service. So that's another energy to take shelter of the internal energy, or to manifest our rebellious nature and attempt to act independently. And we've been beaten daily through that activity. And that is why we go back to this verse and we try to understand that actually we are not this body. We are neither a young person, middle-aged person, or an old person. We are the soul who is existing within this temporary manifest material body in this temporary world that is manifest for us to fulfill our dreams. It is dreamlike. I was reading a purport earlier this morning, and it was Prabhupada was saying that it is like a dream, just like a dream. Obviously, it's a big discussion, that whole concept, but Prabhupada in this purport said it's just like a dream. Pardon me. In a dream, we conjecture so many things seem to be really important and real, and so real, our dream, but actually it disappears. So similarly, the projected concepts of self through the false ego, ahankara, are all dreamlike. Our childhood has slipped away. We thought it was all so tangible and real, but it's gone. And the youth goes, and then the old age goes, and then we go on to another body. So there's one thing that Krishna is explaining: the soul can never be cut. The soul cannot. The body can be cut into pieces by weapons, for sure. The body can be burned by fire. It can be moistened by water, and it can be withered by the effects of the wind, everything material. But the soul cannot. So it's of a different category, categorically different energy. It is eternal. It's not slain. It cannot be broken. And we'll go on to read. I won't do it. I was thinking to do some more. There's quite a few verses dealing with this subject matter. But I'll see if I can hold back and just continue with the verse that we have. Arjuna, yeah. So yeah, towards the end of the purport, Srila Prabhupada's making the point. I think we entitled this verse: Arjuna became liberated by the knowledge received from Krishna. So, as I've been saying, we can try to become liberated or freed from our suffering condition in different ways by different efforts and concepts, by speculating in so many different ways, or we can receive knowledge from Krishna. So that is the surrendering process, is when we can come to this point where we're able to say that, just like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he writes like that. He writes and says, yeah, I've endeavored in so many different ways. I've served wicked and miserly men for a fraction of flickering happiness. I've studied all kinds of philosophical treatises and so on and so forth. Yeah, but he finally presenting himself as a conditioned living entity. But finally I've surrendered. So this is we have again that choice to make, and Prabhupada saying Arjuna became liberated by the knowledge received from Krishna. So, oh, I remember now there's a few more people online. I mentioned earlier, please remember, if you have anything that we're discussing, piques your thoughts, and you think, oh, that's an interesting point, either through the verse or whatever I'm discussing, then please pop a little reflection on it. Whatever you are thinking, just pop it into the chat box, and then we can use that to broaden the conversation, because it's quite amazing how if we do have a little bit of dialogue back and forward, how it opens up different aspects, and we can get a richer understanding from the discussion, because all of you have something to offer, which would definitely do that. Pardon me. So yeah, so we have the ancients and we have the moderns, and the moderns are trying to tell us that they're going to find out all about the soul. Maybe there's no soul. So I'm going to, what am I going to do? I think I'm going to read one more, because I do remember, yeah, text 24 as well. Text 24. I'll just go straight to the translation and purport. This individual soul is unbreakable and insoluble, and can be neither burned nor dried. He is everlasting, all-pervading. He's everywhere. Unchangeable, immovable, and eternally the same. Purport. All these qualifications of the atomic soul definitely prove that the individual soul is eternally the atomic particle of the spirit whole, and he remains the same atom eternally without change. The theory of monism is very difficult to apply in this case, because the individual soul is never expected to become one homogeneously. After liberation from material contamination, and we can see, as I've been mentioning, that we know that there's a lot of contamination around. Again, so you think this is a statement, but it's supported very much by our experience. After liberation from material contamination, so more or less anyone would agree that lust, anger, greed, these, well, not everyone will agree, but let's say from the devotional side, and I'm sure we could enlist many from the non-devotional side that could agree with this, actually, if we discussed it at length, that lust is not a becoming thing. Even in some ways it is. When we speak of lust, it seems like amorous sexual enjoyment, that's lust, but that's one aspect. But just if we expanded the whole thing out, it's not. And Srila Prabhupada he's mentioned that, especially as one gets older, it's okay when you, not okay, but it's understandable in the youthfulness to become all lusty about enjoying in the world. But as we get older and older, it becomes more unacceptable, and after liberation from all material contamination. So that was just one last. Anger. Most people would agree that anger is a contamination. I think that would be very much easier to appreciate or accept. Yeah, anger. So everyone's talking about anger management and non-violent communication and those kinds of things. So anger is a bit of a problem. It's a contamination of the self. So people, again, they don't want to come to the spiritual platform, but they want the spiritual platform without God or without the spirituality, i.e., they want freedom from anger. So everyone's supposed to live in this frustrating material world, which is filled with so many difficulties, but not get angry. You shouldn't get angry. You shouldn't act. So anger comes after frustration. So don't get frustrated by your attempts. Learn how to deal with it. So we want this utopian kind of spiritual existence in a incompatible place. So let's see if there's any more. So we've got lust, we've got anger, lust, anger, and greed. So if somebody's greedy, it's not. It's like a contamination. You might want a fair bit of something if there's something around. Fair enough. But if you're greedy, I want it. I want it. I want it. To the exclusion of other people, you're so greedy. It's not seen as a great quality. Lust, anger, and greed. Madness. Does anyone want to be mad? And there's so many definitions of madness. Repeatedly doing something which causes you pain is a sign of madness. Banging your head against a brick wall, maybe you've gone a bit crazy. So guess what? Material life is that contamination is there. Madness of repeatedly endeavoring in ways which cause us so much difficulty. Illusion, that is a contamination. We don't want to be illusioned. Everyone would agree to that. We want to understand things. If we think that a car is a cat, that would be an illusion. So many examples you could conjecture. So we don't like to be an illusion. That's why we're always asking to understand something clearly. Lust, anger, greed, madness, illusion, and envy. If you're envious of other people, again, we're encouraged by all the self-help gurus and so on to not be envious of others. It's not going to help you being envious of others. Better to be yourself, etc. So there's so many contaminations that have to be removed. So after liberation from material contamination, the atomic soul may prefer to remain as a spiritual spark in the effulgent rays of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the intelligent souls enter into these spiritual planets to associate with the Personality of Godhead. So there's many verses discussing that subject also. That Aruru Krishna Param Param Padam, that one may perform great austerities and penancies and attain the position of entering into that, to remain as a spiritual spark in the Brahma Jyoti. But ultimately, because there's no, this is explained throughout the Vedic literatures, that because there's no ultimate shelter for the atomic spirit soul, there's no bliss. There's a cessation of suffering. There's eternal existence, but there's no ananda, really. Obviously, there's a bliss from being freed from material entanglement, but in the ultimate issue, there is no ultimate resting place and shelter, and therefore they fall down. So it's something it's quite a big subject matter, actually, how long the living entity stays in that Brahma Jyoti. We're talking zillions of years, because Lord Brahma's day is zillion. It goes on. The time factor is a very amazing factor also. So the whole thing actually is quite inconceivable for the tiny little brain. So as we read these things again, we have a choice. Should we accept what Krishna is saying and accept what the acharyas are saying, or should we try to filter it through our limited capacity of understanding and only accept those things that we can understand? Because I'm going to suggest that if we do that, we really limit our ability to progress. That's actually not the process for bhakti. The process of bhakti is to hear from the Supreme Lord via his transparent via medias, the acharyas, the great spiritual teachers, to hear Krishna's message. And when we do that, we are able to make rapid progress on the path. And Krishna's saying all of this. He's saying that the soul can't be cut into pieces, but it can't be destroyed. It can't be withered by the wind. It's insoluble, unbreakable. It can be burned or dried. He's everlasting, unchangeable, and eternally the same. So we're open for any questions or reflections on this very vast subject. Again, it's a small subject. It couldn't be a smaller subject than the soul. 1/10,000th the tip of a hair, the size of the tip of the hair. So it's a very small subject, but guess what? It's a massive subject at the same time. That's the nature. It is very much that way. Sorry, something just popped up on my screen as it does, and it's popped away again. Welcome to the crazy modern world that we live in. But yes, so if anyone's got any reflections or questions, please pop them in now. And remember, it's just any point or thought that maybe sticks in your mind about the soul, the nature of the soul, the struggle in the material existence, and the way of accepting this knowledge or understanding this knowledge. And again, throughout the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada keeps coming time and time again to that presentation that we have different ways of understanding, and the process of bhakti is to hear. Srinu, Krishna says that now hear from me how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. Many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me, and thus they attain transcendental love for me through this process. So that's Krishna speaking, and the Acharya is presenting what Krishna is saying. Or you can conjecture, you can come up with your philosophy yourself. You can be Mr. Charles Darwin and concoct some idea, speculate on something connected to the Vedic idea, which was the sense of evolution. So he presented the evolution of the body instead of the evolution of the soul. We agree that there's an evolution meant to happen, certainly, but that is the evolvement of the soul and his abilities to understand his position. So gradually that soul is given a human form of life as it transmigrates through the different species, not that the different species become the next species. And the great complexity, I've mentioned this many times also, the great complexity is there that Darwin mentions in his Origin of Species. He says that if it can be demonstrated at any time that at the fundamental stage of evolution there is complexity, then my whole theory is undone, because my theory is based on the idea that at the fundamental beginnings of life, it is very, very simple, and gradually over an evolutionary time, gradually becomes more and more, the single cell becomes a little more complex and gradually evolves into a complicated living entity like a human being, for example. So he said, if it can be demonstrated that at the fundamental building stage of life there is complexity, then my theory can't stand. And modern quantum physics has explained it so clearly that at the atomic and molecular stages, there is as much complexity in the cell. Get this. In each cell, there's as much complexity as the complexity of the entire universe. And again, we're overwhelmed with, wow, how is that possible? But that's being confirmed by modern science. And we see there's documented that many scientists who went along with and wrote books, for example, on the evolutionary evolvement, etc., modern understanding, have changed their viewpoint, very prominent ones, in fact, and said that there must be a superior intelligence, because, yeah, it is inconceivably wonderfully great and complex. Every aspect that shows intelligence, the design factor of everything. Okay, so we'll discuss that more. At this stage, we don't have anything in the chat box, and that's absolutely fine. And we'll look forward to tomorrow. I think it might be tomorrow, maybe Sunday. I think it's Sunday. Atmananda picks it up. So I'll mention that we've done text 24 also, so we'll pick it up from text 25 to be continued. Okay, thank you very much for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting you again next week. And until then, I pray that Krishna will look after our spiritual understanding, and so that we can continue to come closer and closer to his lotus feet. Antaraj Srimad Bhagavata, Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Kota Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna. Hare Bol Gurus.